here goes. A freedom of information request put into the government, released today by the Daily Mail, reveals that 21,107 foreign nationals who've come into Britain, claimed refugee status, and in almost all cases been refused, have, in the last 5 years, gone missing. Gone missing. Gone. Gone. Where are they? Probably working on cannabis farms, drug dealing, some form of criminality. I mean, it is just truly astonishing. Well, one man who perhaps won't be surprised about this is Dr. Mike Jones, Executive Director of Migration Watch and friend of the programme. Are even you surprised by these numbers?
No, not at all. And you've got to realise the 21,000 figure is actually quite conservative. It's 8 months out of date. So that number goes back to September of last year.
Yeah.
So the real number is probably closer to 30,000, maybe even more.
So you're saying that the rate at which people are absconding is going up?
Of course. I mean, again, we know the Home Office has lost contact with around 5,700 asylum seekers who are earmarked to be returned to Rwanda. They're only in contact with around 38% of those earmarked to be deported. So again, this comes as no surprise. I mean, the root cause of the issue is this. It's very difficult to deport people. Asylum claims go through a merry-go-round of appeals. If you can't deport people, detention centres become full. If the detention centres become full, asylum seekers then have to live amongst the general population. And, you know,
they're gone. Now, they're talking, sort of moving on a bit from this, but similar theme, they're talking now about those that are earmarked for Rwanda being put into detention. Is that actually happening?
Well, to some extent, yes, but there's very little capacity in the detention centres at the moment. So detention capacity can, vary.
3,000, I think, is something like that.
Yeah, I mean, at its lowest, it's below 2,000. It's sort of around 3,500 at the moment. But it's going to be very difficult to get those people into the detention centres at speed and at scale.
Well, we've been told that by July there will be planes taking off for Rwanda, that the legislation says we can ignore Articles 2 and 3 of the Human Rights Act. And the Prime Minister, not for the first time, but the Prime Minister actually appears to be quite bullish on this issue. What say Migration Watch?
Well, only one person has returned to Rwanda so far, and that was voluntary.
And we gave him $3,000.
And yeah, he received a cool $3,000 for doing so. So the scheme is not yet operational. And yes, they've disapplied elements of the Human Rights Act through the Safety of Rwanda Act itself, but they haven't disapplied Section 4, which potentially allows more appeals to the high courts. And of course, there's Clause 4 in the Safety of Rwanda Act, which allows individuals to appeal deportation based on individual circumstances, the idea of severe irreversible harm. Now, will the bar be set very high, as Rishi Sunak hopes, or will it be set very low?
And we are, of course, even if you disapply a bit, we are still signatories to an international treaty, the European Convention on Human Rights, which I would have thought British judges would rule in favour of.
Well, because they haven't disapplied Section 4 of the Human Rights Act, potentially one of the higher courts could declare what's called a rule of incompatibility. Now, if that did happen, I'm not saying it will, but if it did, the European Court of Human Rights would have a much stronger case against us because domestic courts have ruled against the government.
I tell you what, he's not going to solve this problem. Now, moving on to another subject. But, folks, I have to apologise to you. I do my absolute best on this programme to make sure that when I give you facts and figures, I get them right. And I hate being wrong, so I apologise. I told you last night that in 2023, 250,000 people had come to this country and settled from the Indian subcontinent. That number was wrong. The official figure from India is 253,000, but we needed to add to that 55,000 from Pakistan. So it wasn't 250,000, it was well over 300,000. Worse than I told you. And Mike, this is interesting because we always talk about net migration figures. These are people who've moved from many thousands of miles away, settled in this country in the most astonishing numbers. And I was linking this to some of the scenes we were seeing in inner cities with Muslim voters voting in pro-Gaza candidates. How have we taken that number of people? I mean, they're not all doctors and computer scientists, are they?
No, not at all. It's an intentional government policy. This hasn't happened by accident. I mean, a few things happened. First of all, before we left the European Union, we had a cap on non-EU workers. The Johnson administration removed that cap. The second thing that happened is that the Conservative government outsourced the student visas policy to the higher education sector. And there was an intentional recruitment drive from India and Nigeria. And obviously, because of cultural differences in family structure and economics, they tend to bring more dependents with them than, say, Chinese students. And the Conservatives did not ban or partially ban dependents from joining them. So the numbers have completely and utterly skyrocketed.
It's incredible. Now, legal immigration into Britain last year was the last big figures we had were over 700,000. Let's call it 750,000 between friends. The next big sets of data are out on May the 23rd, or there or thereabouts. We're expecting a big drop from that massive figure, but still a big number.
Yeah, we're expecting still a big number, but there will be a drop. Simply because, Suella Braverman, and this was continued by James Cleverly, have partially banned dependents from joining postgraduate students.
Why they were ever coming in the first place is beyond me, but sorry, go on.
Yeah, they've banned dependents from joining care workers. So this is low-hanging fruit. So we should expect the numbers to drop. But again, that number is still going to be too high.
It won't be tens of thousands, will it?
No, to get to tens of thousands, you need a cap. With no cap, there's no control. You need a cap on skill visas.
Yeah.
You need a cap on student numbers. But of course, the governments aren't partial to that idea.
I suspect the last week of this month will be dominated by whatever those figures are.
Yeah.